Welcome to this session on entrepreneurship development. In this session, we are going to talk about marketing management and allied issues. In particular, in this session, we'll take up for a discussion survey techniques. Market survey techniques are very important because all your marketing strategies, whatever you implement, are basically the result of what you find out from market surveys, what you understand from consumer research, marketing research. So these are very important activities which bring you a lot of information inside the company about how consumers think about your products, what kind of changes do they want in their products, what kind of brands they are happy about, what are the difficulties they face using your products, and so on and so forth. So how do you get information from consumers about existing products? How do you get consumers to react to new products being planned by you is all a subject of consumer research or market research. Okay. So how do companies go about doing marketing research? We'll talk about that briefly. Now, marketing research is a separate discipline by itself. Okay, and many companies take the help of specialist market research agencies trying to conduct professional marketing research, trying to understand consumers and their reactions. Of course, there are many companies who cannot afford the luxury of engaging a market research agency, especially the small companies, new startups, which may not be able to afford the services of a market research company or an agency, may have to actually do the survey or the understanding of the consumers through the help of survey techniques themselves. Okay. In that case, what are some of the important things that they need to know is what we will discuss about. As you would know, marketing research relies very heavily on getting information from respondents through interviews. One of the most commonly used mode of information collection in marketing research or consumer research is to conduct face-to-face interviews. Okay, it's an interaction between a respondent, somebody who gives information, who responds to your questions. He's called a respondent, using a market research term, and the market researcher who is representing the company and trying to find out solutions to problems that the company has. So it is really a question of interaction between the interviewer and the respondent. The interviewer carries out something called an interview. He or she asks questions to the respondent, and the respondent typically answers those questions. And there can be different kinds of questions, but then all questions pertain to the problem that is being investigated. Like if the product is a new product being launched by the company, then the company would design a questionnaire in which it will have questions trying to find out how the typical respondent would react to this new product. What does he think is good about this new product? What are its limitations? The feasibility, the acceptance criteria.
Just when the company has an idea of a product, then they conduct the survey that how will it appeal to the consumers.
See, there are different kinds of survey techniques. In the process of developing a new product also, there's something called concept development and testing. And even there's something called market testing. Now, these are all done with the help of marketing research. Specialized areas of marketing research which dwell on test marketing, specialized areas which deal with concept testing, where you actually present a concept to the respondent, maybe show him a picture, or give him a verbal description of the product or the planned product, which is really a concept at this point of time, and seek his or her reactions to that new concept. Okay, and you benefit from the understanding as to how the respondents think about this new concept. Is there a possibility that this concept will become a hit once it's converted into a new product and is launched in the marketplace?
Even sir, for the existing product, like positioning can be done through
absolutely surveys. Even for existing products, a lot of market research gets done because people or companies want to know how people look upon your brand vis-a-vis other brands which are in competition. How do you really begin to judge whether you need to change the promotion campaign, change the pricing, or change something about the product itself? It's all because you do a market study, a market survey. Now, talking about market research techniques, as I said, interviews are very important, and there are different kinds of interviews. There are certain interviews which are called structured and direct interviews. There are certain other kinds of interviews which are called unstructured but direct interviews. And again, there are a whole lot of interviews which rely on an indirect method of questioning the respondent. So what happens in a structured direct interview, which is a very common form of an interview, there the interviewer is given a questionnaire. A questionnaire is what? It's a set of questions designed by the company itself or the research agency doing the research on behalf of the company, and it contains a set of questions which pertain to the objectives of the research. Okay. Each of these questions has been looked into thoroughly by the research agency or the company itself, so that the questions are simple, very easily understood by the respondent. There's no ambiguity in what the researcher wants to ask and what the respondent understands. And questions can be open-ended questions. Questions can also be closed-ended questions, like the respondent may get a choice of alternatives in trying to answer a question. Now, all this is a subject of questionnaire construction, and even questionnaires, which are called the instruments of data collection in the world of research, are pre-tested. That is, before you actually go out into a survey with the questionnaire, you carry out a small pilot survey. That means you collect a small sample of respondents, maybe 15-20 people, and administer that questionnaire to those people, trying to find out, are the questions easily understood, or are there any problems? Does any question require a modification? Do we need to add certain questions? Do we need to remove certain questions? All these are important feedback for the researcher, based on which he would arrive at the final questionnaire. The draft questionnaire then becomes the final questionnaire, and then it goes into the field where maybe a large number, depending on the scale of the research project. If it's a big project, then maybe lots of interviewers will be engaged, and they will go into different directions. They'll seek out respondents using a sampling plan of some sort, and then administer that interview, administer that questionnaire. So questionnaire construction is an important phase in the development of a survey technique. And once the questionnaire is there in place, then the structured direct interview would normally require the interviewer to go out and meet the respondent, maybe at his home, or maybe intercept him in front of a mall, or go to his place of work and obtain an interview from that individual. It would normally be a personal interview, wherein questions will be directly asked by the interviewer to the respondent, and the respondent would respond, and the answers will be recorded by the interviewer. So this is a structured direct questionnaire wherein the interviewer does not have any liberty to deviate from the set of questions given to him or her. He or she cannot change the order and the sequence of the questions. They are all pre-laid out and are not open to a change by the interviewer. So every interviewer does the same thing, and there's some sort of a uniformity in the entire exercise of data collection.
So when the respondent answers the question, might be there are certain times that the interviewer feels that he can, probe into the way he has answered. So is that liberty given to the researcher?
Fine, we'll come to that. In fact, that's a different kind of an interview. And that is in fact what we just referred to as an unstructured direct interview. It is a depth interview, as she is referring to, where you allow the interviewer to go into detailed probing on a particular aspect of the study, depending on the responses being given by the respondent. Then that becomes a different format of interview. It's called a depth interview, because you're allowing the interviewer to probe in depth. Okay, and the respondent also in this case would be a different kind of a respondent, and the interviewer will also be a different kind of an interviewer. As you can understand, the skill sets required for carrying out a structured direct interview and the skill sets required to carry out a depth interview are quite different. You can handle a structured direct interview with a given questionnaire, by using very simple ordinary interviewers who merely understand what the subject is about and are able to record the answers given by the respondent. That's all that is required in terms of the ability of the respondent, of the interviewer. But then if you want a depth interview to be carried out, which means that you are empowering the interviewer to a large extent to arrange the questions, devise questions on the spot, and develop some kind of a rapport with the respondent, so that you can probe in depth, sustain the interest of the respondent in the interview, and it will become a prolonged kind of an interview. So you get a lot of information, and a lot depends on how well the interview is handled by the interviewer.
So here we need an expert.
You naturally require a skilled interviewer, and the respondent would normally be some sort of a person who is more knowledgeable about an area. So it's not a run-of-the-mill kind of an interview, it's a specialized kind of an interview where the problem is of an exploratory nature. You're exploring something about which your knowledge is inadequate. And the interview is more a mode of exploring rather than asking questions and receiving answers. Okay, so that's a different kind of an interview, an unstructured direct interview. However, the common feature between these two is that all the questions are direct questions. There is no hidden agenda. Whatever you want to ask, the question is put directly to the respondent by the interviewer. But then you will not be surprised that there is another group of interviews where the whole exercise is to present a situation to a respondent in an indirect fashion. And as a result of that situation which is being presented to the respondent kind of subconsciously projects himself or herself to that situation and responds in a manner, thereby revealing inner attitudes, opinions, motivations, drives, beliefs, and all those. Okay, mind you, marketing research deals with uncovering people's motivations, their desires, hidden desires, hidden motivations, attitudes, okay, and some such things or perceptions which are not so easily measurable, and people are not very free and willing to discuss about these issues. Neither will they be able to express what they feel, given a question. So when you think that a direct question answer is not going to fetch the kind of information that you require, you resort to such indirect interviews. Okay, and these indirect interviews are collectively referred to as projective techniques. Okay, they are called projective techniques because of a simple reason that the interviewer presents a situation to the respondent which is quite ambiguous. What do we mean by an ambiguous situation? A situation that can be interpreted differently by different respondents. Even at different times, the responses can differ from the same respondent. So if that is the nature of ambiguity built into that situation, then what is going to happen? If the respondent is asked to look at that situation, analyze that situation, and come out with some kind of an interpretation about that situation,
he will definitely use his perception.
That is right. So the respondent unknowingly projects himself or herself to that situation as if he or she is part of that situation, and he or she is therefore trying to explain that situation from his or her own perspective. Okay, and that is what brings out in the process his or her inner motivations, drives, attitudes, and things that we talked about, and perceptions. Okay, now that's another specialized kind of an interview which cannot be handled by ordinary interviewers. It needs very good understanding of human psychology, people's skills, and all those. And the other thing is, interpreting the results of such interviews can be quite difficult. Unless you have a good grounding in psychology, you will not be able to interpret the findings of such interviews. And as a result of all this, the expense, the nature of cost that is involved in carrying out these kind of interviews is quite high. Okay, compared to the structured direct interviews where the interviews can be handled by ordinary interviewers, and also the time consumed by such structured direct interviews is quite low. But then, as you can imagine, carrying out a depth interview or a projective technique will require a lot more time. But then one thing which we have not talked about, and let's talk about that now, is interviews also depend on the medium for carrying out the interview. There are different media which are used for carrying out interviews.
Telephone or mail.
Absolutely. It's not, when we talk about interviews, let us not only think of a situation where there's a personal interview between an interviewer and a respondent, both of whom are meeting face to face. It can even happen with the help of a medium in between, like a telephone or usage of a mail or the internet. Okay,
video conferencing.
That's right. Even video conferencing can lead to interviews. Yeah. So the media which you use for carrying out interviews will also have their impact on the interviews. Like, as you can understand, on a personal face-to-face interview, the amount of information or the quality of information that you can get is quite high. Okay, because there's a personal interaction face to face. But then over a telephone, or let's say by using mail, these things remain absent. They go out of the interview process. Okay, on a telephone, for example, you cannot conduct a research or an interview for a long time. The duration for which
it has to be very short.
It has to be very short. The duration for the cost factor is very low, but then the duration is very short.
So cost factor and also the interest
will take place.
Interest
Yes.
of the respondent is also very limited in a telephonic interview. I
Right.
suppose.
For example,
Even
you
the
cannot
body
carry on.
language is not visible.
That's
there.
not visible, and all that you have to do is within let's say 5 to 10 minutes, because normally a call going beyond 10 minutes is something that's going to be very boring for the respondent, and
basically.
he might actually hang up, and therefore you lose all the information. So you have to be very short, very brief, to the point, and you can seek very simple, direct kind of information. You cannot probe in depth, for example.
So detailed kind of information, if
Is
we
not
want
suitable.
detailed information, we cannot go for telephonic
That's
or
right.
mail interview.
So if you need detailed information on a subject or a problem or a product or service or something, then this is not the right kind of interview. The telephone interview will not help you. But then if you need some very simple, ordinary information which people are willing to divulge over a phone quickly without thinking much, then a telephone interview can be used. The advantages is the time taken is very short, and the cost involved is also quite low compared to a personal interview. And the other thing, the mail interviews are, they have their own merits. Like, for example, a mail interview questionnaire can be quite long, okay, because the respondent has got time to think about the questions, come out with an answer. He can choose to reply back after a week or even a fortnight. So the amount of time available to the respondent to think about the question, conceptualize an answer and transmit the answer, he has got enough time to do so. Okay, not like in a telephone or on a personal interview where the time available for the response is very short. And the cost, in fact, is also very, very low. There's hardly any payment except the postage that's involved, and if you're using the internet, even that is not there. So internet is also a kind of mail interview where you can have interviews being done in real time. But then the fact is, by and large, mail interviews have one big problem. That is, the response rate normally is very low.
20 to 40%.
It is a very low response rate, 40% on the higher side. You won't expect, if you are doing a mail interview project, you really will not expect more than 40 people out of 100 to respond back.
People might not even pay any notice to the whole question.
Exactly. People do not take a lot of interest in mails that they receive, whether in the actual mailbox or in the virtual mailbox, but they don't pay much attention, and most people, when they find there is a survey, then they reject it. They put it in the recycle bin, and that's the end of it. Now, these are the typical advantages and disadvantages of the different media that are used for interviews. Okay, but then, as I said, the medium also plays a significant role in the quality and quantity of information that an interview can fetch from a respondent. But these are all individual interviews. But then there can be group interviews also. Market research techniques are not restricted to individual interviews alone. You can even have group interviews. Like, one very popular technique is called a focus group interview. What happens in a focus group is this, that a group of respondents, maybe about 8 to 12 respondents, the number is somewhere there between 8 to 12, these people are requested to participate in a group interview session, wherein there will be a moderator. The interviewer in this case is called the moderator. The moderator will introduce a subject of discussion, which can be a product, which can be a problem of a product, which can even be a service. It can be a general discussion from which the interviewer or the moderator will collect information regarding the product or the service. But then it's a free discussion among the participants in the group.
More of a group discussion.
It's more of a group discussion where the moderator plays the role of an observer, and the discussion or the interview is actually an interview being done, or an interaction. It's better to call it an interaction rather than an interview. It's an interaction that's being done among the members of that group. These 8 to 12 people interact among themselves and come out with certain insights which are relevant to the moderator. So you assemble such people in a central location, maybe offer them some gift or give them some kind of a remuneration for the time that they spend, because it is going to last for about 1.5 to 2 hours. And the moderator's role is to guide the discussion only. Okay, he or she is not supposed to interfere with the discussion. He or she is required to guide the discussion along meaningful lines so that people do not get carried away in one sense or the other. But then they restrict themselves to the topic which is relevant to the focus group discussion. Okay, and many a times, in fact, most of the time, the proceedings are video recorded. Because it is not possible humanly for the moderator to note down whatever is being said. Besides, she has other things to attend to during the interview. Okay.
And also people will get What did you say?
more information, analyzing the video footage later on. Because
even
if
one
the
more
discussion
thing
for
is
1.5 to
People
2
will
hours,
get conscious then.
people will become conscious if it's being recorded, and that's not desirable. We want the discussion to be free and spontaneous. Okay, so we don't want to inhibit their free discussion by noting down certain
and
things.
even one moderator can look at one person at a time.
That's
And
right.
if it is video recorded, he can look back at the
Absolutely.
videotape and he can find out what was the body language of one
Absolutely.
particular or the second particular person
Quite
at that
true.
particular moment.
Quite true. Yeah. So at the very least nowadays, video recording the proceedings of a focus group is quite common. In fact, what many people do is, many customers or many clients who sponsor the research or the survey, they actually remain present in a different room and they observe the proceedings real time through one-way looking glass. Okay. So even observation on real-time basis has become quite common in focus groups. Focus groups again are a subjective technique, can be carried out over a small group of people, and therefore whatever the findings are, as they are interpreted by the moderator or the researcher, they are qualitative and you cannot quantify anything. They are more indicative of things rather than something that can be generalized about the entire population. Okay, fine. There is another form of interview technique which is somewhat indirect, somewhat of a hybrid method. It is called panels. Okay. Now, panels are of course something which are maintained and sustained by market research companies. It cannot be done by. It is not normally done by companies themselves. They rely on the services of a market research agency to set up panels and to monitor these panels. What are panels? Panels can be of different types. For example, a consumer purchase panel is a type of a panel. What happens is consumers across different geographical markets are requested to act as panel members. Okay, let's say the unit of survey is a household or a family. So some such families in different geographical locations of the market in which the company operates will be requested to act as panel households. Okay, and to each of these panel households, let's say a diary or a consumer purchase panel diary will be handed over by the research agency, and the research organization will specify clearly that we are interested in these categories of products. So whenever you make a purchase of any brand within this category of product, please make an entry in that diary as to when you purchased, from which outlet you purchased, what quantity you purchased, at what price you purchased, which brand you bought, okay, and some such detail. In fact, they'll even specify what kind of information they would like you to record in that diary. Whenever the sum and substances, whenever you make a purchase in that category, any brand, you have to make an entry in that diary. Now, this is being done by all the households that are there on the panel. So what is happening in one go, and maybe let's say after 1 month or 15 days even, all these diaries are taken back by the market research company. So in one go, after 15 days, the agency is getting information from all those thousands of households which are acting as household panels. Okay. And by analyzing the information that is coming out from those panel diaries, the company can find out a lot of insights about the different brands operating in the space of a given category, and this information can be of immense value to all those people who are interested in that category. Okay, if there are 5 competitors in a category of product and all of them want to study or track the movement of their brands in the different retail markets, in the households, how they are bought, why certain brands are preferred over other brands, and so on and so forth, this is going to be a vital information, and a lot of a lot of companies will take interest in that kind of information because it provides you information on an ongoing basis, and that's where panels are different from interviews. Interviews fetch you information at a particular cross section of time. So it's a cross sectional method of carrying out survey. Okay, as opposed to that, panels are a longitudinal method of carrying out surveys because they fetch you information of a similar nature but then repeated over time periods. And both the types of information are required by companies in order to take marketing decisions. Information of a one-time critical nature are more relevant or more pertinent to research, more pertinent to interviews, where you want information of a non-recurring kind of a thing. And when you want recurring kind of an information, you resort to something called panels. It's not just the consumer purchase panels. Yeah.
So, but major drawback of these panels can be panel conditioning and attrition of panel members also.
That is right. Now, what you mean is that the panel members, by virtue of the fact that they are acting as panel members, their behavior can get conditioned. So it will not be able to, it is not going to be the normal, natural behavior of an individual. It's going to be some kind of a conditioned behavior which is going to be reflected in the purchase pattern or behavior pattern of these panel members. It is a fact. And the other thing is, that's a drawback. Certainly it's a drawback. The other thing is, it is more of a thankless job if you look at it from the respondent's point of view. Every time you make a purchase, you have to make an entry in a diary. It's quite a tedious job. People do not want to do it, and therefore the attrition is very high. People drop out of panels, and therefore the research company has to again search out and add more panel members to the panel so that you have a critical sizable number. Okay, so those are typical problems of the panels. But then the information that they get and the insights that they offer are so valuable that lots of companies have resorted to panels in order to get information of an ongoing nature. Okay, so these are some of the research methods, research techniques quite commonly adopted in the field, some of which can be adopted by the company itself, some of which can be done by market research specialists operating on behalf of the client. But then by and large, these are some of the methods which are very commonly used in order to understand what is happening in the marketplace. It offers you the usual mechanism of feedback that's so vital for companies to bring about changes in its marketing thinking and marketing strategy. Okay, thank you very much.